Hi guys, welcome back to another brainstem video. This is our series on brain tumors, and today we're going to be talking about brain tumor classification. So let's jump right in. So there are a bunch of different ways that you can classify tumors, and we're going to talk about a couple of the main ones. The very first one that we have is classification by how a brain tumor grows. And so when you're trying to decide how to classify these, I want you to ask yourself, how is this tumor going to change over time? And there's two major answers to that question. So either a tumor is benign, meaning that it grows really slowly and it kind of stays in one spot. It just gets bigger in its original location. And these are called benign tumors. And these are not very dangerous. And sometimes they don't even need intervention. So you might not need surgery or treatment. You just kind of have to keep an eye on it because benign tumors can sometimes become malignant tumors. And malignant tumors are the other major group. They are fast growing and they have irregular boundaries. And whereas benign tumors grow in their place, malignant ones spread. So this means that they are not staying in one location, they're moving throughout the body. So malignant tumors are a lot more dangerous, and they definitely require treatment in order to slow tumor progression. And they typically spread within your brain and parts of your body. Brain tumors only spread within your brain. They don't really go outside of your brain. Other types of cancers can spread all over your body. And so one thing I want to point out here is that malignant tumors are by definition a type of cancer. And so that's what we're going to go over next, is a couple of definitions so that you can better understand this type of classification. So, important definitions. Growing and spreading are what we just talked about. So growing, the cells are dividing and the tumor is getting larger, but it's staying in the original location. It's like you see over on the left, a really well-defined ball. You can see the borders and it's clear. And if we see, this is growing. You have the same sort of ball of tumor cells and it's getting bigger, but it's still in the same spot, same shape. It's not changing a whole lot. Okay, but on the right, we have spreading. And this is when cells divide, but they're not just dividing in the same location. They're shooting off from the original tumor and they're moving into the surrounding areas. And sometimes they even move into the bloodstream and they can go into other parts of the body. So here we have a group of cells to begin with. And when cells spread, you see right down here at the bottom, you have an offshoot. It's kind of moving away from the original group. And then you can get even bigger. So we have these like kind of finger-like extrusions from the original tumor. It's not at all the original shape. That's spreading. And now we have this little red blood vessel in the bottom right. And sometimes these tumor cells can spread to the blood vessel and they'll be carried by your blood vessels or sometimes by your lymphatic system to other parts of the body. Okay, right. And one other thing I wanted to note is that this is cancer. And we're about to go over that. But when tumor cells spread, it's considered cancer. So what's the definition of cancer? I kind of just gave it away. But cancer is an abnormal growth of cells that grows and spreads rapidly. So there's two types. There's locally invasive cancer. That's the cancer that sends out those fingers that we were just talking about, like you can see in the bottom left, right? And it spreads to areas that are around the original tumor, but it doesn't really spread to distant parts of the body. And this is what brain tumors do. They spread within your brain. So maybe it starts in your frontal lobe and it gets back into your occipital lobe somehow, but your brain tumor is not going to move to your heart or your lungs. And on the other hand, we have metastatic cancer. This is cancer that spreads to areas that are distant from the primary tumor. And they can, like I mentioned earlier, it can travel through the bloodstream or the lymphatic system. Okay, and we have two images down here. I think this is going to be pretty easy for you guys, but which of these is locally invasive and which of these is metastatic? If you want to take a second, you can pause the video. But I'm going to tell you, on the left, we have the locally invasive because it's all one tumor, but it's irregularly shaped. It's spread out from the original clump of cells. And on the right, we have a metastatic tumor because its cells are spreading, moving into the blood vessels and being carried to parts of the body that are far away from this original tumor.
The next way that we can classify brain tumors is by origin. So when you're trying to use this classification method, I want you to ask yourself, where did the tumor come from? And once again, there are typically two main classes of answers to this question. Either the brain tumor started in the brain, or it started somewhere else in the body and came to the brain. If the tumor started in the brain, we call it a primary brain tumor. And this means that the brain is its primary or first location. Within primary brain tumors, the origin of a tumor can still vary based on what type of brain cell the tumor originated from. So this means that initially we have a bunch of different types of cells in the brain. They're all doing their own jobs, but because of damage or replication errors, one type of cell will become mutated. And this means that it's no longer performing its original function and that it's now cancerous. So a couple of examples of tumor origins are astrocytomas from astrocytes and schwannomas from Schwann cells. But they're not always named after the cell they come from, like what we just saw. So when the tumor starts somewhere else in the body and it comes or it spreads to the brain, then we call this a metastatic brain tumor. So what does spreads mean? So like Emma mentioned earlier, all metastatic brain tumors are cancer. And primary brain tumors could also be cancer, but not all of them are. The most metastatic brain tumors come from primary lung or breast tumors, and they can spread to the brain by the cancer cells being carried in the bloodstream.
Okay, so the next classification system that we're going to talk about is actually a method developed by the World Health Organization, or the WHO. This one, it's super detailed and really complicated, but we're just going to go over the basics and most general WHO classifications. So the first one that we have is cell type, and we also have grade. So cell type, it's related to the origin classification that we talked about earlier. So essentially, you're just going to ask yourself, what type of cell did this tumor arise from? And that's when we can have tumors called gliomas that arise from glial cells. And within that class, we can have schwannomas from Schwann cells or astrocytomas from astrocytes. We can also have neuromas that develop from nerve cells or just your basic neurons. For grade, you have to ask yourself, what do the tumor cells look like under a microscope? It's important to note that the grade describes the characteristics of tumor cells. They can change throughout the tumor. So in one area, they may be new cancer cells and slow growing, whereas in another area, it's very poorly differentiated and very cancerous. It can also change throughout a tumor's lifetime. Typically, the grade gets higher and more dangerous or aggressive the longer the tumor has been growing, but sometimes it can be stable. In order to determine the grade of a tumor, doctors usually do a procedure called a biopsy. On the next slide, we're going to see a diagram explaining a biopsy and going into what tumor cells of each grade actually look like. So on the left, we have a chart here that shows all the different grades of tumors. So grade 1, it's going to be your least malignant type of tumor. They're usually associated with long-term survival because these cells are slow growing and they're almost normal. They're just a little bit abnormal and don't really align with normal brain cells. Grade 2 is a step up from that, and they're going to be still relatively slow growing, but they're going to be a little bit more abnormal, and they're going to start to invade the surrounding tissue. And sometimes these tumors can recur as a higher grade. So what recur means is that essentially you'll have a tumor and you'll undergo treatment or surgery and you'll be cured from that. But then weeks or months or years later, your tumor is going to come back, and that's called a recurrence. And sometimes when a tumor recurs, it comes back as a higher grade tumor. Grade 3, you're going to have actively reproducing abnormal cells and an abnormal appearance. So these cells are going to be more abnormal. They're going to be more distinctive from your normal brain cells, and they're going to infiltrate the normal tissue more, or they're going to invade the normal tissue a lot more. And so these tumors are they tend to be more cancerous and harder to treat. And so they tend to recur often as a higher grade. And then finally, you have grade 4, which are rapidly reproducing abnormal cells and very abnormal appearance. So this is like the most serious type of grade you can have. These are very dangerous tumors and usually aren't associated with a high survival rate. These tumors are also distinctive because they have an area of dead cells in the center. This is called necrosis, or when cells die. And these tumors also form new blood vessels within them to maintain tumor growth. So you'll actually have, it's like a distinctive area of the brain that has its own blood vessels and a dead part in the middle, and that's a grade 4 tumor. And then on the right, we see a diagram of how a biopsy works. So when someone has a brain tumor and doctors decide that they need to figure out what type of brain tumor it is, they're going to take a specialized needle that they insert into the person's skull and into their brain tumor. And this needle can slice off a very tiny piece of the tumor and bring it out of the brain for analysis. So the doctors are going to prepare the sample to be imaged on a microscope. They prepare it and put it on a glass slide that is used for imaging. And then they look at it with a microscope. And an expert called a pathologist is able to look at the tiny sample of cells on the microscope slide and tell you what grade of tumor it is, kind of based on the characteristics of the cells that we just talked about in the chart. So they can see how abnormal the cells are.
Okay, great. So those are the 3 main classifications that we wanted to go over with you. There's classification by origin, classification by growth, and then the WHO classification. But now that we've gone over those 3, there's a really important question, which is like, why do we classify brain tumors? And there's a couple of answers to this. First of all, this is a really easy way to communicate between doctors. Instead of just handing a doctor an entire file with all the images and all the tests that you have, classifying brain tumors can convey a lot of information about the type of tumor and even what treatments might work, all in just a couple of words. And this is important because treating brain tumors takes a team. It's not just going to be one doctor. There's specialists, there's different areas. And so communication between doctors is really important so that everyone's on the same page and they can work together. It's also important to learn about and describe the tumor's properties. So like I mentioned, the different treatments that are available depend on the type of tumor. Typically higher grade, you'll need more aggressive treatment and that sort of thing. And so you can convey that information, and we can also learn more about it, because if we can classify tumors, then we can do research and determine the best types of treatment based on the tumor type. And lastly, this is a great way to keep the patient informed, because being diagnosed with a brain tumor is a really scary event in someone's life, but having a little bit of knowledge about what's going on, that puts the patient back in control, and it can make a huge difference. So thank you all for watching this video. I hope you found it fun and interesting, and check out the rest of our videos on brain tumors.